So my mum and my dad got nicked. We get taken to the police station. And then I don't think we went into care. What we did was we went with relatives, and relatives cared for us. And some of the relatives were nice, and some of them were like, you know, the ugly sisters out of Cinderella. They were kind of a bit harsh, and I'm traumatized. I'm wet in the bed, so you know that doesn't endear us to them. You know, you've got these kids that you're suddenly having to make room for, and one of them is wet in the bed constantly, and that to me speaks of where I was at. You know, I was just I was in freeze mode, I guess. And I've read in this book and in other things that I've read and things that I've watched lectures for. Something happens when you're that young and you can't call for help and you can't run away. Your body and your mind is amazing at disassociating you from what's happening. So you're, and I think that's where I was at. I was so petrified that I disassociated from myself as a coping mechanism. And I was in that kind of disassociated state for years. But eventually, you know, my mum comes back. My dad gets sentenced to manslaughter in the end, not murder. And he does his time in Wormwood Scrubs. I think he ended up in Brixton for a bit from court. And then he ends up, you know, I think he did most of his time in Wormwood Scrubs. And we visit him, you know, backwards and forwards. We're going to the prisons. And it's really weird, you know, at the end of each prison visit, you kind of say, well, why can't Dad come home with us? But he can't.
Terrible.
And years later, you know, when I'm working for the prison service, I told you about the time I had that kind of flashback when I was doing my induction. I did it in Wormwood Scrubs, and I walk into the closed visits area, which was one of the places we visited my dad, and I have this flashback memory of my uncle being attacked by another visitor. So I'm sitting here talking to my dad the other side of the plexiglass kind of thing with my uncle. I don't know if he was strictly speaking my uncle, but he was treated as a relative, and he was the father of the family that looked after me and my sisters. So we're visiting my dad, and then someone attacks him, and there's, you know, one of the other visit. I think he got stabbed in the head because there was blood everywhere, but he may have just been hit in the head and bled profusely. But I don't remember that until I'm 40 years old and standing there in a suit with keys doing my induction in Wormwood Scrubs, and I freak out. You know, I'm starting to think, is this real? What's going on? I'm going to cry. And I'm doing my induction. I've got two or three prison officers with me showing me around, you know, here's the closed visits area and we're going to go over there. And I say, can you just give me a moment? And I pretend to make a phone call. So I had an area office phone on me, and I was allowed to carry it into prison at the time. Looking at the documents, and the other thing I saw within those documents were the prison psychiatry assessments of my parents. Are they fit to stand trial? And so, yeah, I've got them all. I've got them all on my computer. From time to time, I look at them, and I see something new in them. The other thing that got me as well was when I looked at the other witness statements and the other testimonies in court, the family story crumbled, you know, because the family story was based on these people's testimonies. They were saying, you know, your mum called this guy, got him to come round, and then your dad killed him. That all crumbled under questioning. You know, it was all innuendo and hearsay. There was nothing in fact that could be pinned down, and so it fell apart at court. What I didn't realise, I talked it over with my two sisters, and one sister wanted the updated facts. She was the one that was looking for it in the 2000s and couldn't get it. But suddenly she got it, and she was like, wow, well done, you've got it. My other sister didn't want to know. She was quite happy with the family story, didn't want to update it. But when I spoke with the first sister, she said, yeah, and the difficulty was we had to walk to school past the family's house. They had a shop somewhere on our school route. We had to walk past the family on the way to school, and they hated us. And we got, they called us names and this, that, and the other. And it was, I don't remember any of that. I just remember going to school and coming back. I don't remember. Obviously, they had more of the threat and the menace. They could understand better than I could. But that must have been a difficult time for my sisters as well. We've all grown up, and eventually I grew up into someone that was a real rebel in their terms. And so, I was using drugs. I was knocking around with, a gang in their mindset. They were just my friends, really. Most of my friends were from different cultures, and they were all the kind of the bad boys in that culture as well. And so suddenly, as we were growing up, we moved from the, if you like, the family that people would take the mickey out of, and to, they wouldn't dare say anything, because they, if people came round and started to, I remember when my dad died years later, people came around the house and they were mourning and wailing, and they were taking stuff as well. They were saying, your dad told me I could have this, and taking it out. And I remember, and they're all blaming me, your dad died because of you, because of the trouble you brought, and blah, blah, blah. And I remember at one point saying, well, I've had enough of this. And I just said, you lot need to leave, or I'm going to throw you out. And I was shoving, people, getting them to move to the door, and eventually they went. And I remember thinking, what a liberty, these people, they're supposed to be relatives, and I've never seen them before, and they only ever come around when they want something. But yeah, it's funny that we went through that, and now I'm an adult, and I'm looking back on all of that, and I'm beginning to sort it into its various component parts and make sense of it, and think, well, this bit, that's why I'm like that, and that's why I do that, and so and that's why that happened.